Hey guys, welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Lighting Controls podcast. We've got a great guest for you today, and we can't wait to jump into the conversation. But before we do, I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Also, check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com, if you haven't already. We've got all of our episodes on there. Great news feed for all of the lighting controls industry news out there, as well as a merch shop if you want to support the podcast, buy some of our cool merch that we have. But until then, let's get into the conversation. So today we've got a really cool guest, Darren. Darren, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
First of all, Ron, Webster, thank you so much for having me on the Lighting Controls podcast. This was like my dream when I found out you guys had started this thing to be a guest. And lo and behold, you reached out and got me on here. So, yeah, I'm Darren Lapsley. I actually started in the lighting industry proper with a small lighting controls company called Touche Lighting Controls. I started out as a field engineer it was about 7-8 years ago now. So I've been around a little bit around the block. So I know some people and I've had some fun kind of working in the field as a field engineer, and then I transitioned over to sales, business development. Now I'm working currently as business development and specification sales for a lighting rep out of Detroit area. So I'm having fun with that, kind of, exploring different avenues of the business and obviously promoting lighting controls all the way. So thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we always love talking to people who are as passionate about lighting controls as we are. And,
Right.
From your history, it's very clear, like that is the thing that you love doing and focusing on. And so,
Right.
just really cool to have you here. I mean, so you started with Touche, which is an interesting manufacturer as a technician. So just for our listeners to understand, what does a technician look like? What does a technician do for a manufacturer?
Honestly, I think, Webster, I think that's the funnest job like in the industry secretly, because you're doing setting all the configurations, you're talking to the contractor, you're talking to the owners, you're giving owner training, and you're really going out and starting up the system. That's kind of like the industry slang is a startup. So you're going out and you're making sure that the building operates as it was specified and it's programmed as per code. So it's actually a very important job, and it's kind of that last point where anything could go wrong and you got to make it go right, because so everything's been sold, signed, and sealed and delivered and shipped and installed by the time as a field engineer you get on site. So if you walk out there without a process and things like that, it kind of gets hairy. So you got to make sure the contractor understands the installation. You got to make sure the owner understands how it's going to operate. So
which goes back to a lot of the conversations that Ron and I have had in the past about documentation. If you don't have a clear specification, sequence of operations, or control intent narrative, I mean, you're kind of going in blind to how you're going to set the system up.
Right. Yeah. And you have nothing to fall back on when that's not established pre-existing. I think the communication between some of the specifiers and the owners, trying to kind of get them understanding code and understanding how the building's actually going to operate once it's handed over to them. Is a huge. I think there's a gap there for understanding. So I did a lot of owner training as well. Sometimes in the contract they'll write, that they're up to a year later you can do owner training and another site visit and things like that. So things like that do help because you build a rapport with the owner and the facilities management team and the occupants. Even sometimes in some cases, somebody's always like, "Hey, can you make my office go a little bit dimmer?" You know what I mean? I'm like, "Oh, yeah, cool, dude. I'll hook you up real quick." So, but those kind of things, those relationships are important later because as you get known for your customer service and things like that, you can kind of build a good name and reputation for your company out there and for lighting controls as a whole. So.
No, totally. And so now you're a sales rep. And, we've had a couple of sales rep on here before, but just curious what your take is on the sales rep's role in the industry right now.
Ooh, that's a big question. That's a hot question.
Not to make them too hard for you.
I actually had a conversation this morning about, with one of my manufacturer friends who shall not be named, about, will sales reps ever go away? Kind of these hypotheticals that are out there. I know that's a big conversation. And I'm going to say no. Like, I'm going to say people have no idea what it takes to one kind of, call on engineers and architects and support them with the documentation and with the expertise that they need project by project. I don't know if manufacturers have the manpower or frankly, the bandwidth to really handle that, diving in and being on the weeds and over engineers' shoulders and in architect offices every single day of the week, like we are down the trenches. So it's kind of, a learning experience being at the rep level, because you don't know, because I was a manufacturer's rep, I would go in, is this back in the golden days, you do 5 calls a day, 5 or 6 calls a day, and you're selling. But I didn't know what it took on the other side of that for the sales rep to set all those meetings up and build all those relationships at varying degrees and things like that. So now I'm learning that side of the business. I mean, it's hard. It's a hard balance to maintain. It's a hard trust to build. That's, any kind of mistakes on jobs and things like that could lead to that relationship being damaged and you being off the spec. So, which we don't want. So.
Right, absolutely. And so, I mean, ultimately, that's where I think there's a slippery slope of reps trying to pretend like they're flawless because they don't want to end up having the finger pointed at them. But at the same time, that does erode trust over time if there's consistency in failure. And a lot of lighting controls manufacturers get burned because of that.
Right. Well, my advice, like lighting manufacturers, to stand by your product. Like that was one of my, things that when I was running a territory, like I would be there on site. Whether I was in a field tech position or I was in a sales position, I would be the first one to go out to the site and face it. If they take the egg on your face, own up to your mistakes, and also solve it and be visible about solving the problem. And involve and engage the contractor team and engage the owner team. And manufacturers have to lead that. They have to lead that process as well. They can't just sit back and let the rep handle it. No, you need to step in and take your partner hand in hand, and you guys need to walk out there together and handle the problems. So.
Well, to your point, I mean, we've seen the results of manufacturers not standing by their product, not at their own failures, but with the shortages that we've had. A rep can upsell a product as much as they want, but if it doesn't deliver in time, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Supply chain, definitely huge.
So, but I mean, it does boil down to that. You got to stand by your product and be ready to address those concerns. Because again, the rep is only as powerful as the manufacturer is.
Right.
In that regard.
And bad news only gets worse with time, like it's you deliver the bad news so everybody else can plan around that. I know people know that things happen and shipping dates get pushed out and, supply chain issues happen along the way. But as long as those are communicated, I think everybody on the team can understand that there needs to be a pivot and, a deal made in the back and negotiations and things like that need to change. I think that needs to happen earlier than later, and I think some of the manufacturers that figured it out early, like, hey, let's pivot to this product line because we can get it versus this product line, because of the, supply shortages on some certain items. But I think the ones that did are the ones that are being successful right now. So.
Totally. Yeah. Granted, not every manufacturer out there has other lines that they can pivot to, but, the ones that were big enough that had that ability and caught it soon enough, I think you're right. They had that strength to be able to power through that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right.
But yeah, I mean, as far as things go, how many controls lines do you represent right now?
Right now we represent on our line card, I think we have 4 that are, kind of our, between our conglomerate and our independents. So
in my personal perspective, that's actually a lot for a rep to have 4 lines. I mean, sometimes you usually have 1 or 2. You have your go-to, and then you have your backup. But to have 4 lines is great. I think that really gives you a robust position.
Well, our conglomerate just acquired, made a major acquisition in the market, so that kind of helped out, getting us another controls line. So they actually went and bought us one, so it's kind of nice.
So do you? In your group, do you have a whole team dedicated to controls?
Yes, we have a whole dedicated controls team. We have a controls manager. Then we have another specialist who does theatrical controls and some of our more advanced applications. We have another inside applications guy who's been getting trained to be kind of inside outside at some point. And then we also have a dedicated field service tech that's out there, solving problems, lighting and controls alike, emergency and all the different devices that you have. So we got a full team, and we can knock it out for anybody. So it's a good time.
That's awesome.
Nice. You mentioned the field service tech, so I'm curious because, like Webster mentioned, we've talked to a couple different reps, and it seems like varying by territory, right, where people are in the country, the sort of role of the rep as far as how much they do sort of varies.
Right.
We've talked to some reps that they do all the lighting startups themselves. They still have dealers they work with, but they offer that as part of their service, as part of their package. How's that work for you guys? You have a technician. Do you offer full startup services, or do you rely on your dealer network and stuff to handle that stuff?
We're sort of half and half, I would say, Ron. We do the things that we can handle as far as our workload goes, and we kind of assist the manufacturer and work hand in hand with them. So, and again, if we need, like a lot of places, you need somebody on site, within a week. I mean, it's kind of, things get hot, and manufacturer timelines are normally, about 3 weeks out to get a guy on site. 2 weeks if you're lucky. 3 weeks. 2 weeks if you know somebody inside. 3 weeks if you're planning ahead.
Yeah.
So we like to have somebody on hand that can immediately go out and assist and assess and, work with the factory remotely and things like that. But if it's anything deeper than that, we definitely call on factory assist, and if we can't handle it from there. So, but we do have dedicated techs that can go out and start up projects, and we kind of plan for that in the submittal and quoting submittal process, kind of determine whether it's a startup we can handle versus one we want the factory to do. We make sure we plan that with our project team as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. I really do. I think it's very helpful. It's great to have the reps that have somebody, at least a person on staff, right? Because as a dealer myself, there are times when these projects come around hot and heavy and fast, and someone gets sick or something happens, and you need some assistance. And being able to lean on your rep when you need it. So you said factory's 3 weeks out. I can't call the factory and say, I need someone in 2 days. But I can call my rep and say, I need your help, and I can get somebody out, right? So being able to have that balance and being able to lean on your rep, and then I'm sure you can do the same with your dealers. You can kind of lean on them if you need an extra body. It's very helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's good training. That's a good training opportunity too, when you do get those joint opportunities between the rep and, you got your field tech from your factory out there, and they can kind of get an immersive deep dive, because some systems you got to unplug this twice and power it down and power cycle it, and make it work. And then you can do a reset, and that comes in handy for the next time that problem comes up, and we don't have to call the factory again, so.
Yeah, and I think that really helps too as the rep, because it gives you a more in-depth knowledge of the systems, right? So you're really able to assist your customers, because there are some reps who are more hands-off and maybe don't have that sort of technical skill and know-how from being in the field, or having someone on their staff they can call and go, I think we just ran into that. Let me get them on the phone for you. So I that's great. I really think it's great.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. That's when we really start making some good projects.
Throwing another curveball at you,
yeah, I like them.
How do you think we got here, where the reps are doing all of this work? What stimulated all of this? Because before lighting controls really exploded, the sales reps were mostly focused on lighting fixtures.
I think with the drastic code change, Webster, is that's when in education kind of being on the kind of in the bucket realm of what the rep does is educate about different market changes and things like that, especially code change. I think that's when the rep really stepped into that role. I would say 2013, when ASHRAE 2013 kind of hit, and lighting controls went from like $1 billion business to, I don't even know where it is now. Like, I don't even want to say, but it's multi-billions of dollars.
You probably name it. It's probably less than what it actually is.
Yeah. But it kind of exploded. But then I think the knowledge base at the same time didn't explode with that. There wasn't a lot of documentation that went along with, some of the changes that happened. And because IES didn't even publish some of the lighting controls standards until 2019, 2020. I believe it was kind of around the time the pandemic and lockdown and all that stuff happens, when those when they just started talking about controls from an IES level, and standardizing on some of the things like control schedules and other narratives and things like that. So
That's really great to hear, and I hope my IES page, colleagues are hearing that, because they would argue a different thing. They would say, we've always been doing
Okay.
lighting controls. What are you talking about? But I would agree that the outreach has not been as significant as it recently has. And so that's a really great piece of feedback for them to hear,
Right.
because up until that point, I would agree with you. I would agree that really when code started becoming stricter and stricter and demanding more advanced lighting controls resources, that's when we really saw this shift and this new focus on lighting controls and a renewed interest in getting advanced lighting control features. But the IES didn't kind of keep up with that pace. And other educational resources maybe came out of the ether because of that, but it didn't have as much awareness. So, for instance, Lighting Controls Podcast, or Lighting Controls Association, which supports this podcast, they have a lot of great resources because they saw a dearth of information. But, to your point, there's so much demand for information right now, and the reps are the ones really holding that information as best and dispersing it. Because to your point, manufacturers don't have the labor to be able to go to every single specifier out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the onus is on us. We have to take that torch and carry it, and go, just like we do with any other lighting trend that comes out. We go out, educate, and use that education to hopefully they spec our products on their drawings. That's kind of the way the industry has always lived. And like you said, when the codes took off and our knowledge went up, but then it kind of it needs to get translated down all the way down to the customer. That's why I kind of hit on that training in the beginning. So
100%, and I would say that that's really where we drop the ball the most, is getting that education down to the customer. There are so few people out there who really understand what lighting controls do nowadays.
And they can do so much. I mean, they can even attribute to your design. I mean, the way you're theatrical, Ron. I mean, you all day. That's kind of, you use the light to design a certain way, and then affect the way that it affects people's moods and outcomes and things like that. So I think we're just scratching the surface what we can do with LED, and then you couple that with lighting controls. Those technologies kind of came up simultaneously together. They're kind of married at this point. So what you can do as far as controlling a chip, at a granular level with the lighting controls and systems, I'm really interested to see where it goes next. So,
well, and so what do you think one of the big roadblocks is for being able to get widespread adoption of more intelligent and advanced lighting controls?
I think, again, I just think it's education. It's education. It's education.
Sure.
I'll say that in training and CEUs and education and training. Like, that's the way that people are going to get it. Because I feel like every one of my, engineers that I call on, and that, that we call on as an agency even, needs and wants more lighting controls training, and the more that we can get in front of them and talk about it and train them, the more knowledgeable they'll be, and the more they'll lean on us as an agency because of our knowledge and our skill set. So that's kind of the dream,
No, totally. And hopefully one day we'll get to that point where, we have this commonplace knowledge, kind of like the way that we have commonplace knowledge with certain lighting controls elements. People know what a wall box dimmer is, but they don't really know what an occupancy sensor or a photo sensor or a keypad or, there are these new terms that we've introduced.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's just marketing. I mean, that might be, some of the lighting controls agency could do is, put together a huge marketing campaign just on lighting controls one-on-one and the basics. I mean, that's everybody just knowing what those terms are and the language we speak around is, I think a lot of the lighting terms have been, well defined for, kind of over a couple hundred years since we've been using light, so these lighting controls terms are all new. So.
Yeah, and that's something that we've talked about a lot on the show, is that the terms are inconsistent. They're not only inconsistent in the industry, but they can be inconsistent between manufacturers. And not only that, like, one of the big things with a lighting control system is what most manufacturers refer to as a gateway. Well, a gateway in lighting
Mhm.
is not the same thing as a gateway to IT, as a gateway to, right? So
Right.
there's a lot of inconsistency. But doubling back to training,
Mhm.
we've talked a lot on the show about the issue, some of the issues with adoption of lighting controls, and
Mhm.
more often than not, as we start to see more documentation, more sequence of operations, more of these standards come out.
Mhm.
One of the things we've talked to a lot of people about is the fact that a lot of the systems, it wasn't the system that failed, it was the lack of information on the front end that led
Right.
to the lighting controls rep or the manufacturer not having a full understanding of what the owner necessarily expected because of this huge gap in the middle
Right.
in the documentation.
Absolutely.
And then,
Absolutely.
right, so the the million dollar question is, how do we fix that?
How do we fix that? So I think that gap, like, again, I mean, you have to. I think the rep, I'm at the rep level, so I'm going to take responsibility at the rep level, and the manufacturers have to work together to provide this education and to get that in front of the engineers, and the architects, so they can get in front of their customer, who would ultimately be the owner. And then I think, like, when I was out in the field, like I said, I would do a lot of field training, and a lot of companies started making it mandatory that you would do an hour of training, upon, delivery of the system, then an hour, then they would put in a contract an hour a year for the next 3 years or whatever. And I think things like that, just having those repetitions, and manufacturers, again, making, kind of making that standard, and going back out there and making sure they're in front of the customer and training and talking to them. But also, I think people, depending on where you are in the chain, you need different types of training. The contractors that I trained need a different course than the engineers that I train. The engineers need a different
Mm-hmm.
course than the architects sometimes as well, because architects want to see the high level, but they don't want to get into the weeds. They're just going to call their engineer, who needs to know, the parts and pieces, and the voltages and the loads and things like that. So this is a different way. And then the contractors on the installation, they need to know how to install it, how to unbox it, how to, where to put the knockouts and things like that. They need to know all the details and the nitty gritty about the product itself, and how it's going to, install in the space and perform in the space. So just different types
Well,
of training for different types of people.
yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that really hits on something that makes it even more challenging, with an inconsistency of definitional terms and vocabulary, because of the fact
Right.
that you have these three segments that need unique
Mhm.
training resources, and then as a result, those three segments um, need to have consistency and consensus with terms,
Mm-hmm.
but they
Right.
don't. So,
Right. Yeah.
I might talk to one architect who uses the term switch for every single wall station in
Hmm.
a room, but I might talk to another architect who says keypad, or I might talk to a
Mm-hmm.
contractor who
Right.
says,
Yeah.
it's just, there's nothing consistent to it, and as a
Right.
result, we can't really come to an accord. So if somebody took
Hmm.
training from manufacturer X, who used one term, and then a contractor took training from manufacturer Y, they may not align.
Right. Yeah.
We are consistently inconsistent.
But I think, again, this does boil back to that point of getting people trained in a way. And so, it kind of
Right.
feels as though there needs to be like a requirement of training, of like,
Hmm.
you must take this to prove that you know
Right.
what you're talking about. And while there
Right.
are trainings out there and certifications, we don't have anything that's really like, this is the thing, kind of like
This is
the
the standard.
LC.
Right. Right. Well, I know the Lighting Controls Association has the Certified Lighting Controls Professional
Mm-hmm.
program,
Yes.
and how successful has that been?
It's growing. I mean, we're
Growing.
hearing renewed interest in it, and also there's the California requirements as well, which has
Right.
gotten a
Yeah.
huge amount of adoption. But
Hmm.
I think to your point, it's also, or well, to the point we're kind of dancing around here, it's awareness. It's getting
Hmm.
people to know
Mm-hmm.
that it's out there as well. I mean, I think with the LC, it's so well advertised and marketed and a commonplace
Right.
thing,
Yeah.
whereas the CLCP, Not so much.
Right. Right. So that's the question. I guess that's probably the starting point is where do you draw the line as far as qualifications and then
Right.
standardization, and then from there I think the terms will kind of, I guess, iron themselves out because there's not that many of us. There's not many controls guys in the industry. Let's face it. If we could put
Well,
us all we could all get in a room and figure this out. I think
you're absolutely
about
right, and
100
I
of us.
think that also hits on another issue though, because I was talking to a colleague recently who was being told by their employer, you need to learn more about lighting controls, and this person's a lighting
Mhm.
designer, and it's like, I never was expected to learn lighting controls before. And it's like, yeah,
Right.
well, that's the question, is like, who's responsible for lighting controls? Is it the
Right. Yeah.
engineer? Is it the lighting designer? Is it the architect? Like,
Yeah.
there's still unknowns about that too.
Mhm.
So who do we point to the finger and say, you need to get trained in this?
Yeah, we actually had our IES section put on a panel. It's an industry panel to kind of raise awareness for students at one of the universities here in the Detroit metro area. And we actually had that conversation, like who's responsible for lighting controls. Kind of it gets passed around from, like you said, the lighting designer, the engineer, the architect. Sometimes they put it on the contractor, to
Right.
provide a package. They just, say, hey, meet code and
Right.
go from there. So it's like, where does that, who owns that process and and ultimately who owns who is ultimately qualified and certified to do that. So that's the question, like who's
Yeah.
qualified to do controls, like who's certified to do controls. And I
Right.
just think it's still kind of the wild, wild west when it comes to those types of things in our industry.
It is.
Fortunately
So
or unfortunately.
yeah,
Yeah.
no right or wrong answer, but we do like to ask, who do you think should
Yeah.
be responsible for lighting controls? Because we get a lot of differing opinions.
For as far as
For the
The
controls
design and
design, who do you
specification.
think? Yeah,
for design
yeah.
specification, I would say the electrical engineer. Like
Okay.
I would,
Interesting.
I would put that on electrical engineers. I mean, because they have to stamp the drawings, and
Hmm.
oftentimes with lighting controls, you involve emergency or integrated with that. So I think a good understanding of path of egress and all the different things that go with that. I think when you're turning lights on and off, I think that's the electrical engineer's stamp of approval needs to go on that. As far as safety and things like that go.
Yeah, and I
I
think
think it would be their responsibility.
that highlights another point of contention for consensus, is the fact that nobody agrees on this question.
Mhm. Right.
We've talked to so many different people on this show who have a different opinion, and I think your
Yeah.
answer makes a lot of sense logically.
Right.
You're right. Emergency is as integral to lighting controls as anything else, and so why
Hmm.
would you have somebody who's not an engineer take care of that design? But at the same
Right.
time, a lot of engineers will push back and say, "No, that's above my pay grade. Like that's too fancy. I'm just in charge of the dumb stuff."
Right.
It's
Yeah.
tough, because you have the lighting designer, right? And then they have
Mhm.
a vision with the owner, right? They have a vision, and then if the engineer is not part of the lighting design firm, or vice versa, the
Mhm.
designer is not part of the right.
Right.
How do the two work symbiotically to really to make sure that the design does what the lighting designer has proposed? It's a tough question. It really is.
And that's where you, as a lighting rep, I think we are there to fill in those gaps. I mean, we're literally, we and most oftentimes we're oftentimes calling on a lighting designer and the electrical engineer. And I've seen it to where, it's kind of up to us to bring that together. Everybody talks about, the rep gets blamed and dragged into the problem, but
Yeah.
if you're not up in the front solving the problems, like that's going to become your problem later when you win that job. So I think that's where that team mentality really has to go. And the rep has to be like, hey, I'm proposing this system to the engineer. And I've also worked with, or maybe somebody else in my office has worked with, the lighting designer. So you pull them in as well, and you say, okay, let's have a meeting. I mean, we can jump on Teams now and have, a 15-minute call and decide that. And it
Hmm.
might be project by project. It might be, but I think the manufacturer's rep, that big question earlier, we don't go away until these types of questions are solved. And the fact of the matter is, like, it's on us, you know what I mean? Like, that's who it is, when we keep tossing the ball around, the rep has to take that ball and be fluid and change and kind of pass that where it needs to go. So.
But it almost seems like we're reaching a point of no return with that, because the reps have invested so heavily in providing that service. I mean, you were just talking about how many people you have supporting lighting controls, just the design side of things. And so that's not uncommon. I mean, so many other firms are doing the same thing. And again, just one or two lines, not even as big as you guys are. So, I feel like we're the doors are going to slam behind us and lock at some point. And we're just going to be stuck with that responsibility. The sales reps are.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's a question.
Honestly, the way that projects move, I just don't see that going away, because I think the more touches you, like, so when I was a sales rep / field engineer, like, all my reps knew me as a field engineer, so I took over the same territory that I had as a, when I went to sales. So everybody kind of knew I could be hands-on, but I took that as an opportunity to really go out to, the job sites, and the jobs that already sold and shipped, I would go out there, let them unbox each different component, talk through how it connects, talk through what it does with the contract team. And, and then I would, again, once they got installed, I would go out there again. Then when time for the startup, the field tech came out, started up, I would kind of be there as well to make sure everything we talked about was there. But on the front end of that, I had, went into the engineer's office, did a bunch of presentations, got on their drawings, got on the spec, and helped them design it. So I knew all the way through the pipeline that this job was going to be successful, because I walked it through, and the rep was right there hand in hand with me. So, I mean, that's the level of, commitment and, to getting these projects, sold, commissioned, and operating, and to keep them operating, quite frankly, is that level of detail has to be taken at each step. So,
yeah. Well, and we have spoken to people who take on that responsibility in the design firm, but their feedback is, it's a loss. You're not really getting money for that service, because otherwise you would not get, the project, because your overhead's too high. And so to the defense of the reps owning that scope, it's like, okay, they're the ones who really can kind of manage that in a way that they'll still be profitable the next day.
Right. Yeah, I just took it as I think it's one of those things to where you have to, know what team you're working with and kind of know the position of that particular line in the market and things like that. But I think, like I said, I agree with you, Webster, that it's going to be left to the rep to fill that gap, unless manufacturers are ready to hire en masse to get, enough field representatives, enough salespeople out here to really,
or on the converse, dealers really start making a comeback and start scooping up all of that work, or specifiers really take on that work. But, I don't foresee that happening. So to your point, I mean, it is the reps' responsibility, whether they want it or not at this point.
Right. Whether they want it or not. Right.
But so, I mean, looking forward to the industry as a whole, where do you think lighting controls is going? I mean, Ron and I keep spitballing like, oh, this is going to happen as like doomsday, or this is really exciting. It'll be really cool to see where this goes. But, do you have any insight into what you think is going to come down the pipeline for lighting controls?
Honestly, with AI coming in, like, this is going to get scary. I mean, but I really do believe, like, I was actually at an event last night in a park, and at one point the fountain came on and some RGB lights came on, and a couple of ladies I was standing next to were like, "Ooh, look at the lights over there. They're changing colors." I was like, so everybody likes lighting controls. You know what I mean? It's one of those things, like, everybody likes it. You see all the buildings lit up for the different holidays and things like that. So I think that, lighting controls aren't going away. I think our jobs, everybody on this call, their job is safe. Around the podcast, their job is safe is right now. Nobody else knows how to do what we can do. So, but I think, it's going to expand because I think during the pandemic, a lot of people put all the home systems in and really automated their processes and the different types of brands that do the RGB color changing and the scheduling and things like that. I actually got into it a little bit during the pandemic. That's how I know other people were doing it. Because I was getting phone calls from people. I got this lighting system, and how do I program it? I was like, cool. What app do you have? So I think that people have gotten used to those comforts at home, and as we transition back to the office, that's one of the things that people have gotten used to. So they're going to want more lighting controls, and as we look at more biophilic design and things like that, the lighting controls really matter to be able to adjust the light and the amount of sunlight and things that are coming on.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is user comfort, right? And people have those comforts at home and they want it in the office. And people have a hard time not understanding why their office can't do what happens at their home, right? And,
right.
Some of these systems were specified however many years ago. Some of those things didn't exist. So there's a lot of catching up to do for the lighting controls industry. And again, a lot of it goes back to education and educating the owner, and so that they can convey that to their entire team, because it's all about education, it seems like. But yeah, those creature comforts, that's key.
Yeah,
it's key.
Yeah, I've already been in some offices where they have it. They have them real dim, and they're in their coding and things like that. I mean, I don't think it's going away. I think lighting control is going to be a bigger and bigger thing moving forward. I know, that it can really lock in a specification for you as far as being on the drawings and having those details and things like that included. So
now that actually brings up an interesting point that I wanted to ask you about, which is, in your territory, are you seeing that projects are being packaged, luminaires and controls together under one rep, or are you seeing it separated where you have one rep doing the controls and one rep doing the lighting?
This particular market is a package market, so we're seeing a lot of packaging, but that can be, again, like I've also seen it separate where we've partnered with other agencies to, win projects if we had the controls line and they had the lighting package and vice versa. So, I mean, it's just a matter of, again, we want the customers in the market. We want to be in business for the next 50 years. We want our customers to be happy, whether we get the whole package or not. So we're willing to, partner with other agencies that may have a better lighting control solution, or, if we have the better solution, we're willing to partner with other agencies as well to provide the best possible solution for that particular application. So,
and do you mind if I peek behind the curtain a little bit here and ask what those partnerships look like? Like, how do you work with other agencies?
How do we work? I mean, it's a mutual understanding. I think the Detroit market, everybody is friendly, I would say, enough to, there's enough relationships. I know we have our IES product show. It was March. We're actually moving into May this year. So if you can make it, we'd love to have you gentlemen join us. It's going to be a pretty popular show, but it's going to be a pretty popular show. But at that show, you can kind of see how the market gels together, and this market, the lighting controls industry in general, everybody kind of moves around and shifts and kind of goes where needed. So there's a lot of changes and and moves, and that happens not only in the broader market, but also in the smaller markets as well. So a lot of people have worked together in the past. A lot of people, are friends outside of work, even though we're technically competition during the day. So a lot of those relationships kind of will be the backdoor deals that happen, so to speak. And we make it work, because everybody is here to again provide the best solution for our customers and specifiers.
I mean, that's really heartwarming to hear, because there are some really cutthroat territories out there where the reps don't even give each other the time of day, let alone make deals. So I worked out in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and it was a similar vibe.
I've been in that market.
All the reps are really friendly with each other, and it's just sort of like, okay, you got this project, I'll get the next one. I'm sure there's still some heartburn and frustration, but for the most part, those kinds of marketplaces, there really seems to be a lot of collaboration between the rep agencies, which is great to see.
And it's still very competitive. It's still a very competitive market, but I think everybody understands we can't win them all, so to speak. So
right.
Right.
unless we start to win together, so.
I think that's a really great sentiment. Well, we're almost out of time here, but I think we've
Okay.
really talked about a lot of cool stuff here. So I'm just going to kind of package what we've talked about here in a
Right.
bite-sized format. But so you're currently working with a rep agency. You started in tech support services as a technician, which really supporting directly for a manufacturer as opposed to what Ron does, which is as a third party. You would go to the startup of a lighting control system, which is at the tail end of the project when it needs to be programmed and commissioned, quote unquote. And so, but now you're kind of seeing the flip side of things where you're dealing from the beginning to the pass off to the technician, which is the sales part, and really getting involved and making sure that the project meets the needs of the owner, and so that it's a satisfying completion. You do a lot of lighting controls work, it sounds like, and really varies from project to project. But the real crux of the matter with lighting controls, at least from your perspective, is education. We really need to do a better job in our industry, outreach, not just to the specifiers, but to the end users, making sure that they understand what they're getting, what they need, how they can really take advantage of the resources that are out there, because lighting control systems are just getting more and more complex, but more capable at the same time. They can do so many cool things. And if you don't have somebody who understands that, they're going to ignore all the bells and whistles and just go, this isn't working. What's wrong?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so your responsibility is to kind of go there and say, okay, let me know what's wrong. Here's what's wrong. We're going to fix it for you. Make sure that you're happy with the product in the end.
Right.
And so that's really kind of the responsibility of the rep right now. And so from the perspective that I'm hearing, really the rep needs to do a lot more outreach on the behalf of the manufacturer, so that the manufacturer doesn't have to tear their hair out trying to get information out there. But at the same time, the specifier doesn't have to waste their fee educating the owners and end users on the product, because if you're doing that work, they don't need to do that work.
Right. And as a manufacturer, you always want to add value. And I think, lighting controls is an avenue where the reps that realize they can add value there have really dug in and tried to add value there. So, and that's all you want to do, is be a value add on the project. So, ultimately.
Right. And there is a risk that, lighting controls becomes a deduct as opposed to an add, because of the fact that it's, too archaic, too complex, too, X, Y, and Z. And, as a result, we may become replaced by another division, essentially. Maybe mechanical division comes in and scoops up lighting and goes, yep, we can do it easier and simpler, and the end users are happier with our work. So if we don't pick up the pace and get that education out there, we could really get bowled over by somebody else.
That's true. I never even thought about that. That's a good point. You
scared me. Doomsday. Don't take us down the doomsday hole, because we've had this conversation. It gets bad.
Sorry.
Ron, is Webster the doomsday guy? Is he the
no, him and I do it together. It's horrible.
We spiral down the doomsday, but no, I mean,
I got a couple guys that I do that with and spitball with, so it's fun stuff. Yeah.
I mean, but it's that's always the risk of any industry. I mean, it's the VHS versus beta. It's the cassette versus 8-track.
Right,
There's always going to be something else that can come in and replace you. And so how do we make ourselves robust enough that we're the one that gets picked? And I think
we need to get more involved with ASHRAE too. Like, that's something that I've heard a couple of times from a couple of different specifiers, a couple of people that I talked to in the industry have mentioned ASHRAE is mostly consists of HVAC people, people with HVAC background, and not many lighting people. So I think lighting people kind of need to dip their toe in, with the ASHRAE organization, their local ASHRAE organizations, and really get involved there as well. So, and kind of bridge, the community together so that there's an understanding. So.
I would agree with that. I think that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about the ASHRAE perspective, but we are very insular in our industry. We have a very ivory tower mentality of like, we know everything and nobody needs to know, what we know.
Right.
Whereas you're right, there really needs to be more collaboration across all varieties, including ASHRAE or IECC or other avenues. Right. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I just think the
Well,
more of us are involved that with other organizations and spread the knowledge, the better off we'll be. So
I 100% agree.
Yep.
Well, again, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. It's always great to have people who are just as much nerdy as we are on the show. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for including me in your nerdiness, Webster. I appreciate it.
So thank you so much. And to hit on one last thing that you had mentioned, the two words value add. I cannot say enough about making yourself a value add.
Right.
That is something that we live by in our company. It's customer service, value add, make yourself invaluable, because
Right.
when it comes to education, the reps, the dealers, we are that value add. We're the ones that can be on the front lines for the manufacturers to get that education out there. And we're the ones that need to really be hitting this home and be on the front lines. And you have to make yourself invaluable to your customers, whether it's a specifier or a designer or the end user. It doesn't matter
Right.
who it is. You have to be there. You have to be the one with the knowledge, and you have to be there to help them along the way. And you hit it right at the end. That's one of the big things for me as well. So again, thank you
Right.
so much. And I just
Thank
want
you,
to
Ron.
take a minute. Yeah, man. I just want to take a minute to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Again, check out our website if you haven't, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. All of our record episodes are on there, news briefs of what's going on in the industry, and we've got a merch store if you want to buy some more merch and support the podcast. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us here today. And Darren, again, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.